Well, good afternoon and welcome to the second part of this presentation. And as it was announced, my name's Brian Sibley, as it was announced beforehand, we're going to be talking about Joy and about the creation of this book, a moving image, Joy Batchelor, 1914 to 1991, artist, writer and animator, which is also going to be on sale and can be signed after this event, just outside to the left of the theatre. And I'm being joined by, on my left, Claire Kitson, who's the former commissioning editor for animation at Channel 4 and author of British animation, the Channel 4 Factor, as well as Yuri Norstein and the Tale of Tales, for which she wrote Russian, I believe.
Yeah.
Or some measure of it. And Claire is a frequent a judge at various animation festivals. And sitting next to Claire is Jez Stewart, who's the curator of non-fiction and animation with the British Film Institute, National Archive, responsible for the Hallis and Batchelor archive, and he's a regular contributor to many magazines. And beyond him is Vivian Hallis herself, who is, as you saw earlier, you heard, the daughter of Joy and John Hallis, and a former graphic designer, and has been curating the Hallis and Batchelor collection since 1996. I thought it might be useful, particularly in view of the introduction that we were given by the representative of the BFI, just to get a few opening impressions of Joy, and perhaps the best person to start with is you, Vivian, since you knew her most intimately and most for the longest period of time.
This is true. One of the things is that a lot of people who actually worked in the studio have only the haziest visions of Joy, but I knew her pretty well. She was a very interesting mother, I have to say, and a lot of these films that you've seen, maybe not the first ones, but a lot of the others, such as Animal Farms, a farm I lived along with and still seem to be living along with for some maybe mysterious reason. So yes, I'm very glad to be able to celebrate what would have been her centenary, and that so many of you have come to do this with us. Yeah.
Well, I remember my first and only encounter with Joy, although I knew John very well, which was in 1987. And I was very struck at the time because it was an event at the Royal Festival Hall to commemorate Hallis and Batchelor's work. And John was holding forth. I don't know whether anybody in the audience knew John, but John was a consummate showman and was never shy in garnering the spotlight to himself. And John was holding forth to the assembled press and the guests about everything that the studio had done. And there was just this seemingly, to me, insignificant, ignored woman sitting to one side, and I went and introduced myself to her, assuming that it had to be Joy, as indeed it was. And luckily we ended up sitting next to each other and having dinner together afterwards. And it was, to me, always interesting, and it's still interesting, that she was so overshadowed by John, because the studio bore their joint names, and yet, in a way, she is, as we've heard and has been said several times already, the unsung part of this story. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that was?
Well, the extraordinary thing is that she's one of the few women in animation, British animation. Is this on, actually?
I think it is, if you just keep it
okay. In British animation, who seemed to have everything going for her, because she got into animation early in '34, which was before this, awful structure got set up that had all the women on the bottom. She was exceedingly talented. She was full of confidence. Her partner didn't speak any English at the time, so she was really, very much, the face of everything. And she was an equal partner with John until Vivian arrived.
Yeah, let's play
That-
Vivian. And Vivian's brother Paul.
Well,
who
and
should
Paul
share
actually
part of the
probably
blame.
more, because she was still doing, lots of different credits on films.
In
Yeah.
46, I counted something like 6 films that she made. So, she wasn't exactly staying at home. In fact, I was popped off to a sort of weekly boarding nursery when I was a baby. And I think it was really when Paul was born.
Yeah.
that
She did write somewhere that it was, in terms of the birth of you, Vivian, that the partnership was no longer 50-50. But I don't think that was necessarily in terms of... I think she meant it in terms of that she had less opportunity to do more work. I don't think it actually was that for a few years. I think it meant that she had to work so much harder because she was working more as a mother, but also carrying on a lot of the tasks of the company and the business. And I would put the date actually of her contribution tailing off a bit, probably after Animal Farm, when it's harder to contribute her contribution, because I think because the company grew exponentially in that time, that's also the time that commercial television started in this country, and the company grew, expanded massively to take advantage of that. But lots of other people came into the company from different places, and there was more different designers doing, and that's when you see a sort of a divergence of the house style. And I think it would have been much harder to keep that kind of complete control, or be able to do everything. You couldn't possibly, because the company had grown in itself. They had more work to do, and so you see perhaps a watering away of that house style.
I think you touched on something very important there, Claire, when you were saying about the fact that John did not have a great command of English. Even, in fact, to the end of his life, it was always at least eccentric, to say the least. And in many ways, Joy was very instrumental in representing John to the world at large, the business world, getting commissions, to the artistic world and so on. So in a sense she provided the way for John to become who he was as well. But I wonder if, Jez and Claire, you could put a little bit more women in context within in animation, because as Claire has indicated, much of the work that women did in animation, in fact in this country and in America as well, was confined to the ink and paint department, where cells that the animators drew the drawings, and then they were transferred to celluloid by girls who had, it was believed, I think it's true, a greater control of the fine line that was required, particularly when multiple coloured inks were used, as they were in the Disney studio and the other studios in America. And then they were turned over, and the solid colour was painted on the back again by girls. So they were the ink and paint girls. They were the people who were the if you like, the galley rowers of the animation industry, but rarely did they contribute to the business as animators, one or two in America. Sometimes there were significant people in America who were concept artists, like Mary Blair, who significantly styled films like Cinderella and Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland for Disney. But women didn't have that kind of creative role. They were kind of doing the chores, weren't
actually,
they?
at House and Batchelor in the 1940s, that isn't so much
That's
true.
right. That's
and
right.
in a sense, in Larkins as well, in terms of a lot of the key animators coming out of the war. Wally Crook was a woman. There was Spud Houston, she was a woman. Vera Lineker, they all worked into the 1930s. Elizabeth Williams, a lot of the credits that you actually see on there. There were a lot of women animating at House and Batchelor into that period. And
How far do you think that was to do with the fact that Joy, because they had a very unique relationship with Joy herself,
I think
you think that was partly her doing?
Partly, I think it was also just the sense, like many industries during the wartime,
Yeah.
there was less choice of men around. A lot of men were called up. People like Howard Whittaker, who came back to the company, started his animation career in 1940 and then had to basically hang it up for 6 years. And there were still men around, but that seemed to continue. In 1948, Wally Crook is listed as the lead animator at House and Batchelor in terms of the industry periodicals at that time. There seems to be a sea change within the company in terms of the late 40s, early 50s, which is perhaps as much to do with the personnel who were there. The figure of Alan Crick comes up.
Yeah, Vera Lineker, who went on and continued as an animator actually afterwards. She said that when the technical part of Alan Crick, who came in to make a lot of the what would you call them, more things for the Admiralty, things like that.
Although he directed Figurehead as well, which
he did,
really
didn't he?
bridges out of that there's a series of films called Handling Ships, which was all done with model work, and this is a kind of sort of an artistic inspiration based on the experience they had doing that, and another film called Water for Firefighting.
That's true.
But I think, so there was some kind of sea change in terms of the 1950s and the build-up to Animal Farm in particular, whereas a lot of the women left and went to the Larkin studio, where, again, a lot of the key creatives like Nancy Hanna, Vera Lineker, and one of the women running the departments was Phil Winterbanks, another confusing name because that's also a woman, the sister of William Larkins. So there were a lot of women dotted around, but it does, in terms of Animal Farm starting and a real kind of push of professionalism of the company, all the animators who were brought in, mostly from Gaumont British Animation, which had wound up, were all men, and also Harold Whittaker coming from Anderson Dyer, one of the other free runners. It seems that men came in, and that seems to be a period in the early 50s where the women moved away.
And of course, post-war, men were coming back from their service and were getting their jobs back again, and that happened in America as well. But Vivian, it's true that Joy from the earliest days had a very strong belief that men and women were equal, didn't she? I mean, felt that she was as equal as any man, and indeed treated the women who worked at Hallison Batchelor in that way.
I think she did, and the people that worked in the studio at that time, for instance, Vera Lineker, he said what fun she was. She was shy, but she was fun, and apparently Vera was in awe of her drawing skills. She said, Joy would just dash off backgrounds and designs for characters, and she just had this wonderful flowing line. I talked to her just the other day because there was some talk of her coming tonight, but she's quite elderly now, and she said, the trouble is that there's not a lot left because the drawings that she would have done were then redone by other people, and that seems to be quite hard when you want to show somebody's auteur work. It's teamwork. She
also gave a very nice anecdote that was, in terms of Vera remembered being in meetings and John talking and kind of, Joy sitting back slightly and just giggling at John's expression of certain words and not wanting to correct him, just finding it absolutely adorable the way that he would mangle the English language and sniggering away.
Yeah, I think she quite allowed him to get away with that, just for the amusement it caused, actually. Let's talk about her style, which Vivian's just raised, because one of the things that's very striking about the series of films we've seen is that each of them are very much of their period in all kinds of ways. I mean, in the sociological presentation of the feminine character or characters in general, society, the way it's reflected, but also I think in the way that art, the graphic line is shown, and you see in the early work, her early work as an artist that's in the book, you see a style that's reminiscent of people like Edward Borden and Eric Ravilius. You see a very strong graphic line. And that does flow over, however it's simplified in animation into the animated line in the films, doesn't it?
I think that sequence from Newtown, the Charlie film, I know the animators all grew to hate that series, which is what Vera told us, and that they thought it was fairly ghastly, and some people have talked about the character design, but in that early film, some of the background characters, a big portly gentleman on a bike, and he sits on the bus, and there's a beautiful kind of line work in there, and the design of the characters, really flowing characters, and they move in a certain way that probably withers away through that series. But I think that's one of the reasons why I really like that sequence, because the design work there is quite extraordinary, and it's similar to some of the kind of New Yorker cartoonists that you see at the time, and people like Seth are kind of harking back to now. It's definitely there in the style.
There's a whole essay in the book by Jim Walker, who is an expert on illustrations, and he talks about these things in detail.
Let's talk about Animal Farm, because Claire, the extraordinary thing about this film is it's a film that offered, or seemed to offer for the animation industry in Britain, a new opportunity. It was going to be the first British feature. There were articles written about Joy in the newspapers as being the English Disney, the female Disney, Mrs. Disney kind of idea, and it really was. It seemed to be a sea change. It didn't quite carry through, did it?
the film.
No. I mean, not the film itself, but I mean the promise that maybe people thought was coming with Animal Farm didn't really develop.
In the British animation
Yeah.
industry, it never did. There've been several kind of golden ages, just either coming or came and went very very rapidly. There's something about British animation. I don't know. I think it's good, but it doesn't seem to make it. But it's quite interesting, as this thing that we were saying earlier about the spot where Joy's career started to go off the boil, because you've got that wonderful interview. Who was it for? I don't know what it was.
Amanda.
Yeah,
Yes.
we listened to it. I can't. Was that the Kay Amanda one? We heard her, and she was so confident about it. She was just really at the top of her game then, and it was quite quickly after it that she lost the confidence.
Well,
or
it
lost
must be said that she became quite ill, and she had bad things happen, like arthritis in her hands. She couldn't really draw anymore.
She suffered during the war, didn't she? Because
She was
your
bombed, yes.
parents' house was bombed.
Typical my parents. My father was under a doorway, untouched. Mum was buried up to her neck in rubble and had sort of bad back and troubles ever since, really.
You have a very touching story which you recount in the book about towards the end of your mother's life.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, your mother is actually dying at the time, and your father takes up the copy of Secker and Wahlberg's Animal Farm that was illustrated with line drawings derived from the film.
Yes. Well, you say better late than never sometimes, but he was a little late. She just died. We were waiting for the ambulance, and he didn't know what to do, so he rushed and got this copy of the illustrated Animal Farm, and he sat with me as we were waiting in shock, and he said, "Look at this. Your mother was better than me. Look at this line. This is hers. This is mine. It's not as good. She was brilliant." Well, he could have said that earlier, couldn't he?
It is worth noting, if you can ever find a copy of that book, is that it's the credit on the title page is illustrated by Joy Batchelor and John Hallis. So he did give her top billing in that instance.
That's the only time. In fact, in doing this project, I've changed round in the programme notes the order of their billing, if you like. So it's Joy Batchelor, John Hallis, and if you think B, H,
Seems reasonable.
and it changes the whole feel of it, oh, Joy Batchelor and John Hallis, but no, it was always John Hallis and Joy Batchelor. Maybe it sounds better, Hallis and
I'm actually
Batchelor.
saying Ballas and Hatchler now.
Yes.
Let's say something about her ability as a writer, because she was seen as a scriptwriter on a number of those films that we saw, bringing a really lively, interesting sensitivity to subjects that were pretty mundane. I mean, things like, gas and electricity and whether your shoes are fitting right, but always bringing an imaginative touch to something that was didn't have the glory of the great feature film and all that, but actually did have its own ingenuity and enjoyment about it.
Within the BFI National Archive, with the material that Vivian has donated, the Harrison Batchelor collection, we're starting to go through the kind of the paper material, and you can see what is clear in terms of the scripting is the drafting and redrafting and re-going over the ideas and commenting on our own ideas and changing, and sometimes quite virulent comments of kind of this is wrong, and there's definitely a voice and an understanding and never kind of quite being satisfied and having to redraft. But what's also in terms of post-Animal Farm, there are so many ideas that never got off to be the next feature. And so in terms of Pilgrim's Progress, Midsummer Night's Dream, all sorts of kind of little ideas like this that failed to basically fruition. And that kind of constant kind of turning back must ebb some of your confidence somewhat in terms of the features.
Why, with that confidence that she had and that writing skill and that creative skill, when all of the men suddenly, when animation festivals were invented in the early 1960s, and the men all started making their auteur shorts and winning all the prizes and getting talked about. Why didn't Joy want to do that?
I think that by then, I don't know really, she was a bit of a perfectionist, and I think she thought, if you'll pardon the word, she thought it was a little bit onanistic, a little bit of a wank, and she liked things to have a reason. She wanted it to mean something, and so, I don't know, she became very negative and very subversive. And I think she was a bit fed up with the way John had to be out there in the limelight. I'm not really sure why, to tell you the truth.
I think it might just be because she's female, and you know, at that time when no other females did, I think, you know, finally she'd kind of thought, oh well, maybe you know, all of this subject matter that she'd been animating all of her life had kind of got to her. You know, maybe women don't.
Yes. Well, we used to have little laughs about, you know, every year at film festivals there's a kind of theme, like you get 100 films with the dripping tap or the fly buzzing around. And she just got a bit cynical about it all, I think, although she did love animation. And when she saw something good, for instance, I remember at Annecy, before it was even in the main festival, they had creature comforts, and it was just in the sort of, I don't know what's it, like the Mipcom bit. And she said, come here, look at this, you must see this, it's absolutely brilliant. So, a bit like Bob Godfrey used to be. Bob used to snooze when he was a bit older, and then suddenly there'd be something good, he'd open and I'd go, fucking brilliant! And then he'd go back to sleep again. Well, Mum was a bit like that, in that she'd be a bit sort of cynical and fed up with it all, and if she saw something new and interesting, she'd be right there and very, very enthusiastic about it.
One of the things I love about her art, the fact that the picture on the cover is indicative of it, and she herself was that she was an extraordinarily striking woman. Even as an older woman, she was immensely striking, and clearly as a younger woman she was very beautiful, and she had a real sense of flair. There's a wonderful picture of an early year at Annecy with everybody trudging along, and these kind of sort of dull men in suits, and she's there in a fabulous hat and a
Dior hat,
looking sensational, looking as though she's actually in Cannes rather than Annecy. So she had a lot of flair, and you see that flair, I think, in the filmmaking too. The whole style of the filmmaking has great flair and panache to it, even when, as I say, even when it's rather mediocre kind of subject matter.
Yes, well, that was it. She had a kind of gift, really, of whittling things down to the meaning of it, and also making it interesting, I hope. And a lot of it was tongue-in-cheek. I mean, that film, Dolly Put the Kettle On, what is that about? And the other one, with her have a hot water bottle, where is father? You know, she's cooked his meal. A bit strange.
But they are part of social history, I'd say, wouldn't you?
But I think it also is significant in terms of her contribution is to understand that it wasn't the films that went around the festivals and were well known today and have credits on them that ever made the company any money. And I think there is a certain bottom line to her work as a commercial artist in terms of this company needs to stay afloat, it needs to do this work, and so she was doing a lot of the work to kind of keep it going, getting the scripts going to the meetings with all sorts of bizarre sponsors and trying to find a way to make a deathly dull, but not particularly interesting something, trying to make it relevant and out there. And I think that's a lot of, she put all her efforts into that because there was a family and there was a company to run and there was a staff to pay, and everything else was kind of an extravagance in terms of sinking money into, you know, Magic Canvas and Figurehead and even ultimately in year 2000. I doubt it ever made a huge amount of money.
No. I mean, my father was really utopic, and he sort of imagined that the studio was going to be this great bar house, boiler house of animated wonderfulness. And I think that my mother was more of a realist.
I wonder what she would say. What do you think she would say today? The fact that women today have so much more prominent role in animation, and maybe not as much as everybody would like, but there are many more female animators, directors, producers of films all over the world. Maybe not enough.
The situation is basically similar. I mean, I don't know much about the situation now because I haven't been involved in it for a while, but when I last was, animation was still done mostly by small companies that couldn't keep a permanent staff on, couldn't allow, you know, the maternity leave and everything that big institutions and the government do. Women were just, you know, flocking to animation, and then immediately they got pregnant, they would flock away from it and get some more regular job. And it's just such a terrible waste of talent. Don't get me going. I mean, there's because I mean I see problems not just in animation, but is there a new kind of attempt to get women to stop work and have babies? I mean, I know a lot of youngish women now who are much more amenable to that, to being a kind of full-time mother and doing the whole thing. And I mean, I know it's important and everything, but I don't think you should just abandon all your career prospects for it.
I would agree. She'd probably be maybe not surprised, but disappointed in terms of the lack of opportunities to all animators today. In terms of the industry hasn't really changed that much. There's nobody really getting the opportunity to. It's very. I mean, in terms of the struggles that they had to get a feature made, the first Animal Farm was financed with American money. Rodegor was financed with American money. Nobody really, and then you get Yellow Submarine in 1968. Again, a lot of American money coming in. The situation hasn't changed that much for the animation industry, unfortunately. And I think she would probably be not necessarily surprised, or maybe a little pessimistic about it, but disappointed.
Do you not think in America that it's significantly different? And certainly in the area of digital animation, many more contributions from women?
Yes, probably to an extent, but it's
not enough.
No, not enough. I'd certainly say it isn't. I mean, there's a lot of really talented female animators out there, and but it's the same in terms of it's very hard to be a talented artist to have a project that gets beyond animation festivals, regardless of who you are, unless you are connected to a big company like Disney, Pixar, which is the same thing, Sony, DreamWorks, and maybe within those institutions, women still have less opportunity than others, and it takes a phenomenal amount of masochism and martyrdom to do anything to get your film beyond any sort of beyond the network that's there around them, and I don't think that's changed from that period.
We have got another microphone, and if we could maybe have the house lights up, and we have a roving microphone, and if anybody has any questions, it'd be helpful to be able to see if that's possible, so I can see if anybody's got their hands up.
There are a few sort of Palace and Batchelor veterans, if one can say that word here, and a few people that knew Joy, for instance.
Oh,
there's
excellent.
a couple here in the front, one of whom received Joy's suspender belts and garters and bras.
Yes, I read about that. Is it possible to get some light in here, because it is for us.
In a second.
Oh, okay, lovely, thank you. That's fantastic. Okay, sorry, somebody, would you like to say something? It's a microphone coming.
You received the
Here we are.
bras and suspender belts and various items of underwear.
Right.
And she just sent them, and she said, I can't think of anybody else better than you, because I love underwear. And she said, and I had such a great time in this underwear.
So how did you know Joy? Explain for us.
Well, I've known Vivian since 1968, so we've always been round the family, John and Joy.
What's your memory of her, and maybe your memory of her in relation to John, in the way we've been talking?
Oh, I absolutely adored Joy. She, for me, coming from the north of England, from quite a sort of straight religious family, arriving at their house in Hampstead was quite an eye-opener. And their behaviour and, you know, I mean, I never heard a swear word in my house, my upbringing, and here was people at the dinner table, and she was smoking and drinking, and we were just having a ball, and she was just such fun. And as I say, with John, he was, you know, like you say, what is this chin? You know, and it was all this heavy Hungarian accent. And he was quite outrageous, you know. I can remember once him saying to me, I just got a job in London, and he said, and how much do you earn? And I said, mind your own business. You know, he was quite forthright in his behaviour.
And Joy was wonderfully bohemian, wasn't she?
Oh, fantastic. Totally.
Yeah.
And like you say, her clothes. I've got a beautiful cocktail coat she had, 50s one, that Vivian gave me. And she had fabulous clothes.
Well, thank you very much. I don't ask whether you're wearing anything personal. But talking about the accent, I remember that I was interviewing John on one occasion, and he was talking about a future film project of his, which he kept referring to as a film called Dilima. And I couldn't make out what this title was. I didn't want to embarrass myself by saying, sorry, John, what's it called? What does that mean? What is dilemma? And eventually I discovered that it was actually called dilemma. And I went around for ages trying to, I think I had to ask Pat, who was John's assistant afterwards, and say, what the hell is dilemma? And I thought it was dilemma. Yes, please, tell us who you are.
I'm Julia. I'm the daughter of Matthias Schreiber.
Ah, right, who wrote the music for
wrote
Animal
the music
Farm and
for most
yep.
of these, and some that we haven't seen today, like Magic Canvas.
Yes.
I think was the most forward-looking animation film in its time.
How lovely to have you with us. Welcome.
My memories of John and Joy obviously as a child, because my father was killed when I was 11, and then I don't think Vivian and I saw each other for about 40 years. But we are back in touch now. And Vivian kindly comes to Cambridge and does talks about Animal Farm once or twice, and we're both going to go up to Lincoln sometime later this year to do another one.
Do you have any memories of...
my memories, I laughed when you said John's the showman, because that was exactly my memory of him. And Joy, yes, always quiet and in the background. But Paul and I were born, I think, within 2 or 3 weeks of each other. So there are many photographs of Paul and I being given baths together, and our various mothers and various other people in the family, including Vivian, hovering around in the background. So, yes, it's lovely to be here.
And Animal Farm, thinking of your father's work, Animal Farm was a hugely collaborative affair, because not just at the animation studio, but with your father's contribution, the music, Maurice Denham's unique contribution in providing all of the animal voices in the film and so on. It was a very striking piece of collaborative work, wasn't it?
Oh, indeed, yes. And I think Vivian and I both have a favourite, which is The Owl and the Pussycat, which again we didn't see today.
Yes, which was made in 3D, of course, another very revolutionary piece of filmmaking.
But yes, it's lovely to be here, and Joy remembered it.
Well, thank you, Julia. It's nice to have you here. Is anybody else here who remembers Joy? Yes, somebody there. You tell us who you are, please.
I'm Ollie, Paul's son, so she's my grandmother.
Yeah, hi.
I don't have any memory of her, but a funny story when I was born. She got offered to hold me or go for a cigarette, and she actually chose a cigarette. I think it was sorry. I do have a question for Viv. Obviously not knowing her, what is your fondest memory
Of Joy.
of Joy?
Oh my God, there's so many. She was absolutely brilliant. She was a bit like a walking Wikipedia. She was at my book club. She was she just knew everything. One time, I can remember I was with some friends in France, and in fact, this friend had taken me to her father's farm, and the woods were full of this wonderful yellow-orange flower in the middle of winter. And I said, "What's this tree?" And they said, "Oh, I don't know, it's a yellow tree, isn't it?" Bah, oui. And so I phoned Mum up and I said, "What could it be?" And she said, "Oh, Cornus mas, dear, kind of dogwood." And she just knew these things. So my memories of her really are really good chats. And then there's another nice story, but there's another grandson, not mine, hers, Joe, just next to Ollie there. And when she was fairly old and quite sort of grumpy, because she always said that her ambition was to be a grumpy old lady in a wheelchair with a stick. Well, she got what she wanted, so watch out for that. And she used to go around saying, "I'm terminal." And Joe here, with his twin brother who couldn't be here tonight, used to go whizzing round as little toddlers going, "I'm terminal number 1, terminal number 2. And to her credit, she would laugh.
Lovely. Thanks, Ollie. Is anybody else who has any memories or indeed any questions? Yeah, I think there's somebody back there.
I was a pupil of Batchelor from 1956, and you said Animal Farm was a collaboration. Well, they had already done that before I had lessons with him, but he let me sing with the Dorian Singers, and they were very happy to have sung the choruses in Animal Farm. One of their happy memories.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Also got a question. Joy obviously likes the creature comforts. She presumably took on board the idea of digital cartoons.
Yes, well, she liked anything that she considered good. So I don't think the technique, I mean, my father was the one who wanted to do everything new and really took advantage of everything that was invented as it came along. But she cared about whether it was her idea of good or not. And if it had a good story, was a good idea, had a good script, well then she was enthusiastic whether it was digital or 2D or 3D or any D. So
That figures.
Yes, she did. I read something in her writing that John was pushing more on the visual side of things when he was extremely concerned with how things looked like at the end, whereas she certainly had that pragmatic element of kind of, well, it doesn't matter quite so much how much it looks like if nobody understands what you're saying, and you need to have the kind of ground text in there. So the actual final medium and design obviously are important, but having the foundations of a good script and a good idea, regardless of medium.
Anybody else? I think there was somebody who had a question on this side, just down there. Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask Vivian, with your parents, how did they work together? Because they sound like such very different characters. And was it that sort of thing where you have a creative couple and they're more than the sum of the two of them? Or were they more just doing their own thing and having to come together?
that's a very good question. I think it changed over time. In the beginning, they really were a team. It was 50-50, and they did everything. And in fact, it's hard to tell their drawings apart. They really were together, working together. Joy was animating, writing, directing, producing, they were all doing everything when the studio was small. As soon as it expanded, as Jez said, things began to pull in different directions. And I saw that she felt rather left out of things, not going into the studio every single day. She wasn't such a part of it. But where they did stick together, through thick and thin, or thin and thick, I don't know, was the fact that he always deferred to her. Even if they appeared not to be getting on, which they often didn't, her opinion was very, very important to him. So even if she was behind the scenes, he relied on her totally. And when she died, he really fell to pieces.
you say in the book, in fact, that he would come home even after she was perhaps not having really very much engagement in the work that was going on, and would still go over everything that was being done with her and get her views and opinions.
Yes, that's right.
And they were immensely in love, weren't they? I mean, it is in their meeting and their first association is a kind of classic love story situation as well.
Yes, that's true. In the book,
Love at first sight.
I found some lovely drawings of hers that she did when they ran off to Budapest together to make a film. And she did these drawings, personal drawings that I found in a drawer afterwards about her and John. And you can tell I think they were completely smitten with each other, even if afterwards it all kind of got a bit dodgy. But life is dodgy, and most of the people of their generation split up or divorced, and somehow they stayed together.
And ran an animation company in the extremely difficult 20th century animation industry.
And
having
surviving
that
too.
on top of their personal and business relationship tied in, that's a sign of an extremely close bond. There's a good quote that she once put in terms of their first meeting, when basically John put an advert in a newspaper to look out for animators for a film that was Music Man, and she responded for it, and she when she saw it, she was like, how lucky. Not just for John and all for her, not just for her. She knew John was lucky to have somebody with the experience she did, and she went in, and she said something like, as well as being an experienced animator, I was extremely good at exchanging looks, and this one was a doozy. And I think it's a great line like that. Just in terms of that first meeting, there was clearly something there.
And there was no language. I mean, they had no shared language.
That probably
the whole
made
thing.
it stronger, yes.
They communicated by drawings and signs and looks.
But to be so brave as to go off to Hungary with this man after such a short period for a job at the age of, 20-something? 22?
And indeed, when they came back to this country, John, by virtue of the fact that the war was going on, John was in a situation where he was have been put into a holding camp because he was considered an alien, but by virtue of his relationship with Joy was considered a friendly alien and was allowed to stay, but she had to adopt that status as well, so she made that potential sacrifice.
I think that she was fairly shocked, the fact that she thought by marrying him she was saving him. What she hadn't thought about is that she was considered a Hungarian citizen for the duration of the war while they're making propaganda films for the government.
Yes.
It's quite bonkers. Yeah.
Any last question, because we're going to have to draw it to a close, but anybody got anything else or any comments to make? Is there somebody here? Sorry. Thank you.
I don't think, did I miss it, but where did she train? Did she go to art college or did I?
No, you didn't miss it, and it's
We
all in
didn't
the
say,
book.
sorry.
Yes, we didn't ever say. But she actually went to the great Watford Art School, and she had a place offered to her, a scholarship at the Slade, but she had to turn it down because there was no. Her parents couldn't support her, and even with a scholarship, she couldn't have afforded to go. So, I mean, she was a star pupil. She was bright. She won all kinds of scholarships at school. And I even found a photo of her at art school. So she was trained, and but then went out into the wide world. And there's the story of how she got on in a silkscreen factory and painting little ornaments, and then fell into animation.
But very quickly moved from being a painter to being an animator. I mean, an extraordinarily quick leap, as we were saying in the comparison of the times.
Yes.
So.
The thing is, she could draw, and that is a great asset. I mean, a lot of people can get away without drawing, but it's fantastic if you can draw, and she could, and she used it to good effect. And the other thing is that early on, she was bitten by the animation bug. Once she discovered how to animate, she couldn't get enough of it. to begin with.
But also in the sense that you said that she knew what was good, she also knew what was bad, and she was not afraid to stand up and say, this is rubbish, you should be doing it like this, and that's what pushed her forward.
And that's how she got to be a script writer. She looked at the stories and said, my God, what's this, you know, and then did it.
The fact that she did have that scholarship to the Slade but wasn't able to take it up is indicative of the struggle that represents her life in many ways, that she always working from the back foot. Can we just, to wrap things up, just like to ask each of you, here we are thinking of her centenary, what is the mark that she's left, and is it something that will, a legacy that will go on? Claire?
Well, the mark that she's left is, I think she's the only woman who actually, you know, did it properly. Such a large company, such a successful company, you know, her name is there. It's a remarkable model, I think.
I mean, certainly through the book that Vivian's put together, but also we should mention Martin's short film at the start of this evening. I think is a really fantastic sort of summary of her career that hopefully will spread online and really actually start to put her work out there. And when we were here 2 years ago to mark John's centenary, I mentioned an anecdote in terms of my first job interview at the BFI. There was a bronze bust in the corner, which I later found out to be John Hallis's head, and that actually now sits on one corner of my desk. I don't believe there is a bust of Joy Batchelor out there. If any budding bronze sculptors out there want to make one, I have a space at the other side of my desk, and partly not just because I want to make my big chess set of British animators out there and have the, I think John Kenmaker puts them as the king and queen of British animation. I think they would be a fantastic king and queen in the British animation chess set, and would make my desk sort of slightly more even.
Excellent. Vivian, last thought.
Well, she was a fantastically interesting person, and I just want people to remember her because she's worth remembering.
Well, thank you. I hope we've either reminded you of Joy Batchelor if you knew her, or introduced you to her if you didn't know of her, other than perhaps as the second half of a famous studio name. I'd like to thank, on your behalf, please, Vivian Hallis, Jez Stewart, and Claire Kitson for being with me here, and indeed to all those of you in the audience who've contributed as well. Thank you. And if you would like to see the book, or perhaps have a signed copy of it, there will be a signing going on in a few moments' time. But for the meanwhile, will you please thank your panellists this evening? Thank you very much.